Welcome to Module 7 of the Entry Point Basic Training Program. Module 7 covers all of our VI SPDATs. So today we're going to talk about all 3 VI SPDATs that we use in suburban Cook County. For handouts, you might want to reference the 3 VI SPDATs, but we have everything we need in the slides of this module for you to be able to follow along and understand what we're talking about. So on your screen, you see a slide that plots out all the steps of the entry point housing and referral process. In other modules, we talk about how people get access to our program and how we prioritize people, match and refer them for housing. In this module, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the phased assessment, the assessment stage of the housing and referral process, and particularly in this module, we're going to look at the VI SPDATs. So there have been other modules that help you look at other parts of the assessment, other parts of the phased assessment documents, and modules that come after this one in the program look at all the other parts, including part 4, where the VI SPDAT actually lives. But this is a part that's going to dig even deeper into the VI SPDATs part of part 4. So here we are in the phased assessment part of the process. And here's another chart where you can see where the VI SPDAT lives in this process, in this flow. So after you've done your safety screening, your initial intake, you've paid attention to the timing of how you proceed with these assessments. So in other words, for certain groups of people, you move very quickly to part 4, like as quickly as clinically feasible. For other groups, you wait 7 to 14 days or services or contacts before you start part 4. There are other steps in part 4, including getting the CE-VI SPDAT consent signed before you even start this VI SPDAT. All of those things are covered in greater detail in other modules. Today, we're just focusing specifically on the VI SPDAT, which comes before the rest of part 4 and parts 5 and 6. We use 3 VI SPDATs in suburban Cook County. The single adult VI SPDAT, which we use for anyone over 25 who does not have minor children. We use the TAY, which stands for Transition Age Youth VI SPDAT. The TAY VI SPDAT is for anyone who is an unaccompanied youth up to age 26, up to their 26th birthday, including age 25, who does not have minor children. A transition age youth is anyone up to age 25, all of their 25th year, and they're unaccompanied, which means that they're traveling as their own head of household. They don't have any other adults, any caretakers, parents, or guardians traveling with them or working on their behalf to secure services or housing. So that's unaccompanied youth. And for people in that age group and in that circumstance, we use the TAY VI SPDAT. And the third VI SPDAT that we use is the Families VI SPDAT. And this is for anyone of any age who has minor children of their own. So we're going to dig into those just a little bit more. Again, the single adult VI SPDAT is for anyone over 25, so 26 and over, who does not have minor children with them. And we use these for each and every adult in that family or household that has only adults. So you're going to do multiple single adult VI SPDATs for any households or families that have only adults in them. Maybe this is a household or a family that has adult couples or partners, with no children or no minor children, then you're going to do one for each of the partners in that partnership. Maybe you're looking at a parent and an adult son, daughter, or adult child that they want to be housed with that are still part of that household. And if all of those people, including those adult children, are over the age of 18, we're considering them single adults, and we do one VI SPDAT for each of those people. If they're adult siblings, brothers, sisters, siblings who want to be housed together, if they are over the age of 18, we do one single adult VI SPDAT for each of them. If they're friends or fictive family or any other constellation of people over the age of 18 who are traveling together, who consider themselves family, who are part of one household, then we do one single adult VI SPDAT for each one of them. And then you indicate to the CE lead team, to the entry point team, that this is a household of single adults who want to be housed together. Let's look a little more at the TAY VI SPDAT. Again, we use this for anyone who is an unaccompanied youth, their own head of household, no parents, guardians, or other adults looking out for them or traveling with them, and youth who do not have minor children of their own. So we do this for each person age 25 and under who's traveling without their guardians or caretakers and have none of their own children. So if you have a family or constellation of 2 or more transition age youth who want to be housed together, who consider themselves family, regardless of whether they're biologically connected to each other or not, we do one TAY VI SPDAT for each one of them, and we indicate to the entry point lead team that these folks plan to be housed together in one family in one household. Now for family VI SPDATs, this is for anyone who has minor children, including TAY headed families with minor children. So this is the tricky bit to remember. However old the parent is, if they're 17, 19, 35, 75, if they have a minor child, we're going to use the family VI SPDAT for them. The presence of minor children outweighs anything else about the decisions that we make about which VI SPDAT to do. And the other thing that's different is we do one family VI SPDAT for the entire family, the entire household. If they have 2 people, if they have 17 people in that household, we do one family VI SPDAT if any of the people in that household are minor children. And the VI SPDAT and other parts help the entry point lead team know how many people there are and what their ages are and so on, so that we can consider all the people in that household. Just to underscore, we're going to use one family's VI SPDAT for the entire household anytime there are minor children involved, regardless of how many adults or children are present in the family or the ages of the parents or other adults. If the children are minors, it's a family VI SPDAT for the whole family. We use one single adult VI SPDAT or TAY VI SPDAT for each person in the household if there are no minor children involved, and we indicate to the entry point lead team if these adults or TAY intend to be housed together. Now, maybe you have a mixed constellation of someone who is 27 and someone who is 24, and they are partners or siblings or family of some other kind, and they want to be housed together. Because the 27-year-old is not officially a transition age youth, you're going to use the single adult VI SPDAT for that person. Because the 24-year-old is a transition age youth, you're going to use the TAY VI SPDAT for that person. So one for each person in the household according to their age, and then indicate to the entry point lead team if those folks are a household and intend to be housed together. So now we're going to dig deeper into the individual singles VI SPDAT. And we're going to go through this fairly thoroughly. And then for the other two VI SPDATs, we're only going to look at or highlight things that are different about those other VI SPDATs. So VI SPDAT is a funny acronym, sounds like a sneeze, is a long and complicated acronym, and you don't necessarily need to memorize what it stands for. But if you're interested, it stands for Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool, the VI-SPDAT. You might or might not be aware that there are other documents called just the SPDAT. They're much longer and more detailed, and we are not using those. I don't think anyone is using those in this region, and we're certainly not using them at this stage for any of our coordinated entry processes. So this is the triage tool that we use, the screening and ranking tool that we use to assess the vulnerability, or one of the tools to assess the vulnerability for anybody who does not have minor children. So on your VI SPDAT, depending on what you're looking at, you may or may not see this beginning bit, the preamble, which includes an opening script. And I'm not going to go through all the pieces on this, but I want to highlight a few things that are important for us to keep in mind. It's important to explain to people why we're doing the VI SPDAT, give them a rationale for this part of the process, and recognize that it usually takes less than 7 minutes to complete the VI SPDAT. If I'm taking longer than that, it's because I'm probably doing it wrong. And the main way that I do it wrong and take longer is if I ignore this next bit. The VI SPDAT is designed so that a client can provide only yes, no, or one-word answers to answer all of the questions. Now, if they want to give us details, they want to tell us their story or share their thoughts and feelings about their predicament, we give generously of our time and attention and make space to hear all that. But we're never probing for details or proof of any kind. We just want people to answer yes, no, or one-word answers. And if we do that, the VI SPDAT will take us less than 7 minutes to complete. Might take a small bit longer for a family one, but not necessarily. We want to let people know that any question on this can be skipped or refused. Like we said in the module where we talked about our ethos for doing assessment, it's trauma informed, the client's in the driver's seat, we set up those escape routes. So the client can choose to do some of this now and take a break if it's stressful, pick it up later. They can skip any question that's stressful for them or that they don't want to answer. Now, it might be helpful to prompt people that the more information they give us, the better it will help us to prioritize them according to their specific challenges and needs. It might be helpful to explain and remind people that the more they tell us about whatever challenges they're facing, the better we will be able to advocate for their being prioritized for needing housing. There are lots of built-in disincentives for people telling us the answers to some of these questions. People might be afraid that if they acknowledge having mental health difficulties, using substances, especially illegal substances, having difficulties with the law or their legal history, that might make us judge them or reject them, or that it might make us less likely to admit them to housing. That's because that's the kind of experience people have often had historically, and it's how conventional, not housing first, but conventional housing programs have sometimes operated in the past. But we want to encourage people to trust that we are different and that we employ housing first and harm reduction, and we really only want to know what someone needs so that we can help meet those needs. So the more information someone gives us, the better for them. We can encourage and prompt and remind them of these things, but again, we are counting on someone's self-report, and we're not urging or forcing them to answer any of the questions, and we're certainly not probing for details. If it seems like the participant doesn't understand a question, or it seems like they're answering a different question, we can repeat the question if needed. Now, this VI-SPDAT and all the VI-SPDATs are based on extensive research and development. So every word in every question in here is designed on purpose. This tool is crafted and refined so that it helps us compare apples to apples, so to speak, with everyone else who gets the same assessment, not just across our system, but across maybe the entire world. It's used widely throughout the United States and Canada and other places as well, and has been in use for a very long time already. If you're interested in more history about the research and development behind the VI-SPDAT, reach out to someone on the coordinated entry lead team, and we will let you know. But the VI-SPDAT was developed by an organization called OrgCode, and you can also look them up and find out all kinds of great resources on their website. So that is our preamble about the VI-SPDAT. Now let's look at the questions. Probably you're not going to have to ask someone their name, their date of birth, their age, and so on, because probably you already have that in HMIS as part of their intake and their first assessment that we consider part 2 of our phased assessment. We generally don't ask people for their social security numbers just to do the VI-SPDAT. And if you're doing the VI-SPDAT, you don't need to worry about putting in people's ages, and you don't need to score it on paper or anywhere in a fillable form, because when you put it in HMIS, HMIS will score it for you. So save yourself the headache, the time, and the trouble. Don't try to score it. Higher math is not required for administering the VI-SPDAT. Okay, so the first question of the VI-SPDAT gets at history of housing and homelessness. We've probably asked these questions again on before this on someone's intake, but this is a chance to revisit some of these same questions that we've already asked them and that might already be in HMIS. How long have you been homeless? How many times have you been homeless? And so on. This is obviously helping us get at whether or not someone meets HUD's requirement for homelessness history to meet the definition of chronic homelessness for eligibility for permanent supportive housing, and so on. So the next section is the risk section. Now the question says, in the past 6 months, how many times have you, and then asks a bunch of things. And someone's response is going to be just one word or a number. 0 times, 3 times, no, I have not, so on. And you enter that number in the blank that's provided. Now, an interesting skill that I'm going to teach you now helps us make sure people are using the right time frame so that we're getting an objective number comparable to other people's objective numbers. And that is, anytime you're asking a question that has a time frame, like this one says in the past 6 months, you count out loud backwards for someone to help them frame that time. So for example, we're in May right now, and I might say to someone, in the past 6 months, so this is May of 2020, so May 2020, and I'm counting on my fingers, but you can't see me, to April 2020 is 1 month, to March 2020, to February 2020, to January 2020, to December 2019, to November 2019. So since November of 2019, that's 6 months ago, since November of 2019, how many times have you? And then carry on with these questions. The first question is, how many times have you received healthcare in an emergency department or emergency room? How many times have you been taken by ambulance to a hospital? Now, these are referring to the specific person. So if I went with my buddy to the emergency room because they were sick, if I rode in an ambulance with my mom because she was having a stroke, that just makes me a good buddy or a good kid, a good supportive companion, but I don't get credit on my own VI SPDAT for having been at the emergency department or ridden in an ambulance with someone else who is the primary patient. How many times have you been hospitalized as an inpatient, used any crisis service, including the ones listed there? How many times have you talked to a police because of any of these things, including just that the police told you that you have to move along? For some folks, that's several times in a day, right? And this is a risk factor. All of the things on the VI SPDAT are designed to help us assess someone's risk of serious consequences or outcomes, and to put a finer point on it, the risk of someone perishing while homeless. That's what the VI SPDAT is designed to do. And so every question on here has been researched and developed to help get a raw number of comparatively how dangerous someone's circumstances are regarding those outcomes. So that's the part of the risks, part B of the VI SPDAT. There are more questions on there that we ask someone. Have you threatened to or tried to harm yourself or anyone else, been attacked or beaten up, and so on? Again, I want to remind you, you do not need to score things. You can just put in an HMIS and it will score it for you. Some of the scoring is sort of simple and some of it is more complicated, but there is a score that someone will earn for every section on the VI SPDAT, and the computers do all the work for us in HMIS. Question number 7 has some sort of funky, maybe ambiguous language. Do you have any legal stuff going on right now that may result in you being locked up, having to pay fines, or that make it more difficult to rent a place to live? Sure enough, there are so many kinds of legal stuff, including a history of eviction, including so many different things that a client might have. We don't need to know the details. If they have any of those things, we check yes, and they get their point for legal issues. Does anybody force or trick you to do things that you do not want to do? This is getting at coercion, not that I sometimes do things that I regret later or am embarrassed about, but did someone coerce, force, or trick me to do that thing? That's question number 8, and question number 9 is, do I do things that might be considered to be risky? And this one ends with, or anything like that. It details some things like exchanging sex for money, so on. And again, this gets at some of the riskiest components of the street life or street economy. And we don't know the details, and we want to remind or reassure people that we're not judging them. We just want to know what their risks are. Moving on to section C, socialization and daily functioning. Question 10, is there any person, landlord, business, bookie, dealer, anybody, government group like the IRS that thinks we owe them money? Now, right now, this time of year, a lot of us have the IRS thinking that we owe them money, right? But there's so many reasons why someone might be in a predicament where someone thinks that we owe them money. Now, this is not any kind of proof or determination of whether we actually owe someone money. The issue is If I got a bunch of bills of people thinking I owe them money, whether those are legitimate bills or not, that is a risk factor. Question number 12 is a little bit depressing, maybe. Do you have planned activities other than just surviving that make you feel happy and fulfilled? Might seem like a silly thing to ask, but having hope, having meaningful daily activities, those are important parts of resilience for someone. Question number 14. Actually, question number 13 is about self-care. Are you currently able to take care of your basic needs like bathing, changing clothes, and so on? And it includes other things like that. Now, this is not an assessment. This is not our assessment of somebody's hygiene or presentation. We may or may not believe this person needs to take a shower or find food or clean water or things like that. This is about their perception of whether they have access to what they need in order to take care of themselves. Question number 14 gets at abusive relationships or family breakdown or things like that. So certainly someone who has become homeless because of fleeing violence of some kind would get a yes in this column. Section 10, the wellness section, has a bunch of yes/no questions. Question number 20, I assert we should ask for everyone and not just someone that we perceive to be female, because people of all gender presentations are physically capable of being pregnant whether they want to or not. And pregnancy occurs at a higher rate for people who identify as trans or gender nonconforming and people who identify as gay, lesbian, or pansexual than for people who are cisgender or heterosexual, statistically speaking. So I think it's safer to ask that question of every person. Question 15 is, have you ever had to leave an apartment, shelter program, or so on because of your physical health? Again, this is about people's perception of their circumstances. There's lots of other questions on here about physical wellness type things. Question number 17 is a little tricky because it says, if there was space available in a program that specifically assists people that live with HIV or AIDS, would that be of interest to you? Now, someone might say yes, and they might be seronegative because, heck, if I could get into that program, I don't care if the rest of the people there have HIV or AIDS and I don't. I want to get in anywhere I can fit in, right? It doesn't matter. This is not a question of whether or not someone has HIV or AIDS. It's okay to ask it the way it is written. It's meant to be asked that way. Now, there are lots of reasons why someone might not disclose to us their HIV status, and lots of reasons why we might not put that into HMIS even if we know it. But I'm going to make an extra pitch here outside as a side sort of tangent that if our client is HIV positive or has AIDS, we may be able to house them faster in a program that's funded to serve people or house people who have HIV or AIDS. So that's an extra incentive for our clients and for us to disclose this specifically to the Entry Point lead team, whether or not you ever put it in HMIS, just because we might actually have openings available to house someone immediately, possibly. Can't be sure. So that's the wellness section. There's lots of other questions on that section that are on the slide now, including 21, which is part of the substance use part. Now, the first few questions we talked about were physical health. Now we're talking about substance use questions, and there are two of them here. Has your drinking or drug use led you to be kicked out of an apartment or program? Will drinking or drug use make it difficult for you to stay housed or afford your housing? This might be a chance to remind someone that this is not about judging them and that we're not going to keep them from being housed just because they use alcohol or drugs. In fact, it's important that we know what their risk factors or obstacles are. 23 is another one about, have you had trouble maintaining your housing or been kicked out of housing or shelter because of these things: mental health issue, head injury, learning disability, so on. This is not a chance for us to prove that someone has a disability. This is about someone's perception about whether or not these disabilities or conditions are getting in the way of their housing. We have other opportunities, and we'll talk about that in the module that covers part 5 of the phased assessment, to really think about what constitutes a documentable disability. So those questions are the mental health question. And at the end of this D wellness section, there's a thing called trimorbidity, which is a fancy word that means someone has all three: physical health, substance use, and mental health difficulties. And then they get a bonus extra point for trimorbidity if they have all three of those things. Again, if someone has, if you're using HMIS and someone has already, if you've clicked in each of these categories for someone, then HMIS will calculate and add the trimorbidity score for you. Are there medications you should be taking that you're not for whatever reason? We know there's a whole slew of reasons why someone might not take medicine or might not have the medicine they need, and so on. There's a question about trauma there, which is question 22, and that rounds out the individual VI-SPDAT. Now, right now, I'm looking at a page called the scoring summary. Again, you do not need to worry about scoring. HMIS will do that for you. I would strongly encourage you not to sit and try to trouble over this in front of a client. You might decide it's best not to tell someone what their score is, not because we're trying to keep information from them, but because it might be confusing or meaningless to someone. We cannot guarantee anything about the rate in which someone will be housed because of their scores. And on the column on the right where it says results, the VI-SPDAT, as it's used internationally, has some recommendations about score frames where we might consider different kinds of housing interventions for someone. But in suburban Cook County, because of the capacity of our system, and because we choose to do dynamic prioritization, which is covered in a different module, we do not guarantee that everyone who has scores of 8 is going to get permanent supportive housing, because we don't have enough permanent supportive housing to house everyone with scores of 8 or above. So if you tell your client, wow, you got an 8, that means you're getting permanent supportive housing, you're setting yourself and this client up for a lot of disappointment and stress, because that is just not a helpful way to think about how we prioritize people in our system. Because of dynamic prioritization, you can line up a room full of people according to their VI-SPDAT scores, and I might be the first in line right now. But in our system, people are always coming into and going out of that room, and then we reshuffle people. So there might be someone come into the room. I might have been in this room for 10 years, and I'm at the head of the line right now, but someone might come in who is more vulnerable than I am by VI-SPDAT score and other factors, and they might go to the head of the line ahead of me. And there are also other factors about housing choice and preferences and all kinds of other things that determine how quickly someone gets housed. So this VI-SPDAT score is only one component of how we prioritize people and one component of how people get ranked or ordered for who gets housed next. There's a bunch of follow-up questions on the VI-SPDAT, which you might not even have on the form that you're looking at. We don't need to ask any of those things. So that's the singles individual adult VI-SPDAT. Now we're going to fairly quickly look at the family VI SPDAT. Everything in the family VI SPDAT covers all the stuff in the individual VI SPDAT that we just looked at. They're looking at, though, whether the head of household is 60 years of age or older. And we're looking at the entire household together. So there's some additional sections on this family VI SPDAT where we're enumerating or naming all of the people, and particularly all the children in this household, because we only do this family VI SPDAT if there are minor children. If you get to this section and you're thinking, actually, there are 0 children under the age of 18, stop what you're doing. You're on the wrong VI SPDAT. Go back and do one of the other ones for every member of the household. But if there are minor children, this is your chance. Again, question number 3, ask of everybody, is any member of this family currently pregnant? Now, please don't trouble yourself with the scoring of this because it is way complex. And that is why we're glad and lucky that we have HMIS to do that for us. Now, a thing I want to highlight here, instead of visiting all the questions on here, is just to point out that everything on the individual VI SPDAT is here on the family one, but you're going to see this verbiage. In the past 6 months, how many times have you or anyone in your family done any of these things? Have you or anyone in your family, so you're thinking about the family as a whole. So maybe I went to the emergency room once and my son who has asthma has been there 7 times in the last 6 months, and Granny had a stroke. So we put all of that together. There's all the questions that we went over before, but you talk about them for the whole family. And then there's another special section on the family VI SPDAT, that's section E, the family unit section. These questions do not appear in any form on the other VI SPDATs because they're looking at the entire family, including the minor children. And this section is looking at legal issues for the whole household and sort of family stability or continuity. Because part of what happens in homelessness or housing crisis is families get disrupted. People come into or out of the family or stay in different places instead of staying together so that everyone can get housing. We have lots of clients who are staying with us at our shelters, coming to our day centers, and they don't have their little kids with them because they've somehow managed to find temporary housing in some other way for those little kids. But ultimately, that is their family. They intend to be housed together. And even though we may never see those little kids, this family VI SPDAT might be our first opportunity to start reckoning with the fact that this is a family and the folks need to be housed together, and we need to consider all of their barriers, challenges, and so on. So this family unit question section is looking at whether or not any kids have been removed from the family by Child Protective Services, whether there are any family legal issues that are coming to bear. Again, we don't want people to be embarrassed or overwhelmed. In fact, this might be a reminder, an opportunity to remember that people might be eligible for housing supports through DCFS if the family is involved with DCFS. So if this family is involved with DCFS, not only are you noting that on this VI SPDAT, but you're noting to your supervisors, to the coordinated entry lead team, because there might be other housing options available that this family is eligible for. 34 gets at what we were talking about. Have any of the children lived with family or friends because of homelessness? And so on. Question 36 is looking at whether the children attend school more often than not each week. One of the most stable places kids can be is school. They can get food and other supportive adults and things like that there. So if their school is being disrupted by homelessness, that's a big risk factor for that family. More family unit questions on this screen. So many things on here about family stability, including, are the kids in the family being expected to sort of be parents sometimes and look after younger kids? Does the family have opportunities to just be family together and hang out and build relationships and do things that are not survival related, and so on? So that's the special section on the family VI SPDAT, the family unit section. If you have any questions about any of that, you can always reach out to the Entry Point lead team or come to one of our case consultation calls or Zero meetings to talk about it. Again, there's a scoring summary on the family VI SPDAT, and you can see that families have a maximum of 22 points, whereas the other two VI SPDATs give an individual person, whether they're an older adult or a TAY, they both can earn up to 17 points or get ranked up to 17 points. The family gets 22 as a maximum because of those extra sections, the children section and the family unit section that only appear on the SPDAT. Again, you don't need to score it, and you shouldn't be troubling yourself with what is in the results column, because we do prioritize housing for families with minor children over families that do not have minor children. That's already built into the prioritization rubric of suburban Cook County. But we're going to find the first available housing intervention that meets that family's needs and preferences, regardless of housing type and regardless of score. So that's the family VI SPDAT. Let's look at a few things on the TAY, Transition Age Youth VI SPDAT. If you are scoring this by yourself, which, like I said, you shouldn't, then people get scores for being extra young on this one. There are a few places on the TAY VI SPDAT that have the same overall question that's on the other SPDATs, the individual SPDAT specifically, but maybe a little bit of extra verbiage added to account for some of the ways that homelessness functions differently for transition age youth. And on the TAY VI SPDAT, couch surfing counts as literal homelessness. It gets a little bit trickier when we get into eligibility for housing programs and so on. So that's a thing to work out in the eligibility section, which is a different module, which is part 5 of the phased assessment. But for now, while you're doing the VI SPDAT for transition age youth, if they're sofa surfing, then they get their score in this section. We're looking at some questions. We're not going to go through all these at all, but some of the questions that you already see on the individual VI SPDAT have, again, just some slightly different wording or options on the youth one. So they name juvenile detention as a possibility when they're talking about the incarceration parts. Now, there are 2 or 3 questions on the youth VI SPDAT that might seem a little funny when you think about them, that are not at all on the individual older adults VI SPDAT. And one of those new questions is question number 8 in the legal issues. Were you ever incarcerated when younger than age 18? You might think, well, this person's 21. What difference does that make? They're not incarcerated now. But like I said, these VI SPDATs are developed after lots and lots and lots of research and complicated theory and development engineered to help us get at what are statistical risk factors, statistical predictors of poor outcomes for youth. And one of those is having been involved in the criminal justice system before age 18. So statistically, if someone has had that involvement, they're more likely in the future to become homeless, to stay homeless longer, to have the most tragic outcomes of homelessness. Question 10, where it talks about risky behavior, includes survival sex for food, drugs, or a place to stay in addition to money, because most homeless youth have participated in survival sex trading. There's some other language in the income section to account for the fact that we're talking about young people. The social relationships, domestic violence, abuse, trauma questions are pretty similar for the youth, but they're grouped a little bit differently. But you don't really need to trouble yourself with that because HMIS knows which one you're doing and how to count the scores. So just ask the questions on the page. In the wellness section, here's another one. Here's the second of 3 questions that appear on the TAY VI SPDAT that we don't see on the other ones. Are you currently pregnant? Have you ever been pregnant? Or have you ever gotten someone pregnant? We ask this of everyone of all genders and gender presentations, just like the other questions, but this is getting at the statistical likelihood of negative outcomes, the predicting factor of negative outcomes from having been involved in pregnancy, regardless of what your gender or role was in that pregnancy. There's one more question. If you've ever used marijuana, did you try it at age 12 or younger? Again, we're a harm reduction housing first organization in suburban Cook County. All of our agencies and housing programs must be housing first and harm reduction. So in many ways, it's none of our business whether someone uses marijuana or any other substance, right? But so that's why this question might seem a little odd. But again, this is predicated on research that shows that having used marijuana before the age of 12 is a predictive factor of negative outcomes of homelessness and other kinds of harms in the future. So there's our transition age youth VI SPDAT. Again, don't trouble yourself much with the scoring summary because HMIS does it for you, but we see the same possible grand total of 17 points that we have on the adult single VI SPDAT, individual VI SPDAT. Now, our system prioritizes transition age youth over older people, and we have other mechanisms for doing that. So we prioritize a young person over an older person for any program they're eligible for if all other things are equal, because we recognize that being young is especially vulnerable and that homeless youth often become homeless adults and that homelessness gets more and more intractable for younger people, and we want to try to solve it early and solve it fast. That brings us to the end of our VI SPDATs module. And I encourage you to ask any questions of the entry point lead team or bring your questions to your supervisor or to case consultation in the future. In other modules, you'll learn about how this VI SPDAT gets paired with other factors in part 4 of the phase assessment.